Welcome to Serafina Audiobook Collections. Chapter 1, The Cold Arrival. The stone crypt smelled like damp earth and stale desperation. Darius hated funerals. He particularly hated this funeral, mandated by the royal charter after the death of a minor Beta Lord, forcing him to waste 3 days among a pack so weak its very scent was a political liability. Moments later, he surveyed the scattered, malnourished mourners from the high perch of the balcony, his royal guard standing like granite monuments behind him. His goal was simple: maintain rigid control over his forces and find a single crack in the pack's defense where the rogue operative might be hiding. Truth be told, the rogue's escape nearly 3 years ago was the failure that fueled Darius's unrelenting pursuit, a silent, corrosive guilt he carried like iron armor. He was impatient, burdened by the memory of a past failure that had cost him his closest advisor, because the rogue had compromised their entire northern network. The pack, the Sunless Watch, was a disgrace. Their alpha, a simpering fool, was weeping dramatically, a performance designed to gain pity, not respect. In fact, the hall itself was a visual metaphor for their decay. The wood was splintering, the stone floors were dull with neglect, and the air was thick with the sticky smell of weak pack fear. Darius's command presence, usually a silent, crushing weight that bent others to his will, felt wasted here. Still, he searched, his golden alpha eyes sweeping the room, looking for the calculated stillness that defined true threat. Instead, his gaze settled on a flicker of movement near the service door, low to the ground. It was an Omega, scrubbing a spilled drink from the flagstones. Omegas were the unseen, the pack's foundation, yet utterly disposable. This one wore a tunic bleached gray from too many washes and moved with the hunched resignation expected of her rank. Yet her hands, quick, practiced, almost invisible, were not what caught his attention. It was her eyes. As if pulled by a string, Darius watched her rise to accept a dirty platter from a smug-looking Beta. For the briefest span of a breath, she looked up, and her gaze didn't meet Beta's face. It swept his posture, registering the subtle tension in his shoulders and the nervous tick in his left hand. It was a clear strategic read, the kind his elite intelligence unit was trained to make. The focus was too sharp, the observation too deliberate to be mere accident. Her world tilted, he thought, seeing the tiny tremor run through her spine before the Omega mask snapped back into place. Deep down she knew the truth of the pack, and that truth was a weapon. The discovery was like finding a rare jewel hidden beneath garbage. More importantly, this anomaly was perfectly positioned to gather intelligence, unnoticed by anyone. What followed was a quiet calculation in Darius's mind. He was drawn by a movement in the shadows that was too controlled to be fear, too knowing for her station. He had found his first fragile crack. Chapter 2, The Ghost in the Corner. Darius remained fixed on the Omega, Eris. He saw her return to her scrubbing, the metallic tang of the cleaning solution momentarily masking her own faint, neutral scent, the scent of someone determined to be forgotten. Because of that, she had achieved true invisibility, a cloak more potent than any shadow magic. Meanwhile, Darius had to appear engaged. He listened to the tedious political murmurs of the surrounding lords, nodding occasionally. His mind, however, was running a profile on the Omega anomaly. Not only that, he was working backward. Why was she allowed to be this intelligent? Why hadn't the pack leadership crushed that spark? At the same time, he watched the man standing closest to Eris, her uncle, the highest-ranking Beta of the pack. The man's face was a study in dismissive contempt, periodically spitting insults that were meant to remind Eris of her worthless status. He called her dreck, dirt. Darius registered the disdain not just as cruelty, but as a potential security risk, because the uncle's constant verbal assaults meant he completely underestimated her. A wolf who underestimates his cleaner is a wolf vulnerable to poisoning, or, in this case, informational espionage. Darius's goal had shifted: profile the asset and confirm if the intelligence he sensed was deliberate or accidental. As the silence stretched between Eris's actions and the pack's noise, Darius saw her flinch slightly when the uncle accidentally knocked over a water pitcher. The reaction wasn't fear, it was frustration. The momentary crack in her mask was one of annoyance at having to re-clean a finished space. This was not the reaction of a broken wolf, but of a meticulous operative. He recalled the disastrous capture attempt 3 years ago, where his team had been foiled by one tiny, overlooked detail. Maybe it was fate, or perhaps only the desperate need to redeem that failure, but Darius felt a visceral pull toward Eris's silent strength. I need her local knowledge, he admitted internally. She is the perfect, unassuming spy because everyone sees her Omega rank and no one sees the mind behind it. As if the forest watched, Darius shifted his weight, his heavy leather coat subtly brushing the stone balustrade. That slight movement drew the eyes of his chief strategist, General Volkov, who offered a sharp, questioning glance. Darius subtly shook his head, warning him off. With every heartbeat, the tension in the room built for Darius, not from the funeral rites, but from the potential volatility of the asset he was tracking. He had confirmation, she was a strategic thinker. He had confirmation, the antagonist, the uncle, was positioned right next to her, completely unaware. He needed to extract her, fast. He watched the uncle's dismissive contempt for Eris, registering the disdain as a potential security risk, setting the stage for the coming clash. Chapter 3. The Worthless Proposal. The funeral proceedings finally concluded, dissolving into a disorganized feast of lukewarm spirits and stale bread. The wolves gathered closer, their voices loud and careless. But then the noise snapped into sharp focus. The uncle, fueled by too much drink and the temporary power of having the Alpha King on his land, began a boisterous rant. He was complaining about the financial drain of having a mute liability, like Eris. His voice was a crude, grating sound that cut through the polite murmurs. "She's worthless, I tell you," the uncle slurred, gesturing wildly at Eris, who instantly froze, her back stiffening slightly before she adopted the posture of total subservience. An Omega with no scent, no strength, no blood worth claiming. I plan to sell her to the border traders by week's weekend. Darius felt a cold weight settle in his chest, not out of pity for Eris, but out of pure, pragmatic fury. Because the uncle's foolishness threatened to destroy his best intelligence asset right when the hunt was reaching its peak. Before she could move, Darius saw Eris's fists clench briefly, a raw display of controlled fear and resistance. His goal violently changed: secure the asset before the pack destroys it. Use this moment of chaos to assert dominance. On the other hand, claiming a low-ranking Omega was a massive political liability, a sacrifice of his own carefully constructed image of cold, unattached power. He quickly weighed the cost. The uncle was close to the rogue and Eris was the key to his family's secrets. The cost was acceptable. Darius descended the grand stairs, his boots hitting the stone floor with a rhythmic, measured cadence that silenced the room before he even reached the bottom step. The sudden absence of sound was a shock wave. His scent, cedar, ice, and raw, untamed alpha power, flooded the cramped hall, a physical punch that made the weaker pack wolves gasp. He stopped directly behind the uncle, his shadow engulfing the drunken fool. "You speak of selling property, Beta?" Darius's voice was low, resonating like a subterranean drum. He didn't raise his voice, yet the words felt like iron chains snapping into place. "And I find I have a claim." The uncle turned, confusion melting into drunken panic as he faced the Alpha King. "Your Majesty?" Darius cut him off with a single devastating word, his gaze fixed on Eris, who was now staring up at him, her gray eyes wide and startled, her mask completely shattered. "Mine." The moment their eyes locked, Darius felt something unexpected, a spark of challenge beneath her fear, a recognition that she was now bound to the king, not the dirt. And just like that, everything changed. The decision was purely tactical, not romantic, but the intensity of her terrified gaze created the first genuine knot of intrigue in Darius's perfectly ordered world. That's why he felt a cold, calculated satisfaction. He had shocked the antagonist, secured the asset, and launched the conflict. Darius took one deliberate step toward Eris, his scent enveloping her, ensuring the pack's noise faded as he prepared his next irreversible move. Chapter 4. The King's Claim. Darius didn't wait for Uncle to recover. He reached down, his leather glove brushing Eris's shoulder, a touch that was purely possessive, because he needed to solidify the public lie instantly. The hall was swallowed by a deafening silence. It felt like the entire pack held its collective breath, the air vibrating with disbelief, fear, and suppressed fury. "The girl is under royal claim," Darius announced, his voice carrying the authority of 1,000 years of lineage. He stared directly at the uncle, whose face had gone from drunken swagger to sickly green. Without warning, Darius scented the sharp metallic tang of the uncle's fear, but beneath it, he also scented a bitter, controlled rage, a reaction too composed for a mere beta. That's why Darius knew his move had struck home. This man was capable of more than just small-time cruelty. As if summoned, General Volkov, Darius's chief strategist, stepped forward, his massive frame blocking the hall exit. Volkov's eyes, however, narrowed slightly at Darius. He wasn't questioning the king's authority but his sanity. What's worse, the claim was entirely unprecedented. An alpha king taking an omega, a low-scented, abused omega, as a mate? It screamed of weakness, or worse, some twisted form of insult to the ancient traditions of their kind. Darius simply met Volkov's gaze and gave one imperceptible nod, tactical. "Trust me." Meanwhile, Eris remained frozen, her body now radiating a high-frequency terror Darius could practically hear. He saw her mind racing, processing the irrevocable destruction of her omega cover. The anonymity she had cultivated for years, the foundation of her secret mission, was gone, vaporized by 3 words. More importantly, this act violently thrust her out of the shadows and into the deadly scrutiny of the court. She didn't know what scared her more, the sudden visibility, or the terrifying Alpha King who claimed her. Darius reached down and gently cupped Eris's chin, forcing her wide gray eyes to lock onto his. "You will come with me now," he murmured, the words for her ears alone, but his intent was broadcast to every wolf in the hall. It was an announcement of possession, not affection. In that moment, Darius felt a rush of calculated satisfaction. He had delivered shock and awe to the antagonist, the uncle, secured his fragile asset, and launched the central conflict, all in one swift, brutal move. Which meant the real work, unraveling the asset's lies and extracting the truth, was about to begin. He released her, turned his back on the speechless pack, and signaled his personal guard. "Clear the royal encampment. The royal mate requires privacy." Darius dismisses his royal guard, taking Eris directly to the annexed royal encampment, leaving the stunned pack behind him. Chapter 5. The Terms of Trust. The king's tent, annexed to the main hall, was opulent, smelling of rich leather, steel, and Darius's own pervasive scent of cool cedar. Eris stood exactly where he left her, near the entrance flap, rigid and small. After the chaos of the hall, the silence here was heavy, pressurizing the air between them. Darius stripped off his gloves and tossed them onto a campaign table covered in detailed tactical maps. His goal was clear: establish immediate, non-negotiable control and assess her true strategic depth. He needed to know if she was an operative or just a talented observer. "Do not insult me by maintaining that pathetic demeanor, Omega," Darius stated, his voice flat, devoid of the forced romance he'd used minutes before. Even so, the word Omega tasted like ash on his tongue, realizing the depth of the lie she'd inhabited. With every heartbeat, Darius watched for the inevitable crack. Instead, Eris simply raised her chin a fraction, her fear still visible, but now tempered by a cold, beta-level defiance. The change was stark, like shedding a skin. "You have destroyed my work, Your Majesty," Eris said, her voice surprisingly low and steady, not the meek whisper of an Omega. Because she had just been claimed, she dared to speak truthfully. Darius walked toward her, stopping close enough for his immense presence to loom but not touch. As if the world narrowed, the only things that mattered were the faint scent of old soap on her skin and the fire in her eyes. "Your work? Collecting laundry and scraping plates? Do you truly believe that is what I claimed?" He leaned down. "I claimed the wolf who watches, the wolf who compiles, the wolf who understands Beta's tremor and the flaw in my own guard rotation." Darius then laid out the full, shocking bargain, the terms of their forced alliance. "I am hunting a rogue operative, a skilled killer who has gone to ground in this worthless pack. I believe that rogue is closely connected to the man who just tried to sell you. You have the intimate knowledge of this pack. You are my eyes in the darkness. You will tell me everything, or you will be treated exactly as the asset you are, and discarded when your utility ends. And what do I gain? Eris asked, her voice trembling now because the stakes were suddenly life and death, not just survival. My protection, Darius replied, his voice hardening. And the resources of the royal guard to achieve justice for your mother, whose memory I know you are risking your life to clear. Despite that, Darius's core emotional question echoed in his mind. She is a master spy. Can I trust someone who willingly built a life out of lies? Before she could move, Eris accepted with a slow, deliberate nod. Just like that, the partnership was forged. But Darius noticed the subtle tightening of her jaw. A decision made, not a surrender, confirming she was a calculated risk. Darius leaves her in the opulent room, feeling a residual tension. The asset is secured but not yet controlled. Chapter 6. The Boundary Enforced. The following morning, Darius met with his chief strategist, General Volkov, to discuss the immediate aftermath of his shocking claim. The mood was professional, but the air felt charged like before a storm. Your Majesty, Volkov began, his gruff voice carefully neutral. The claim has stabilized the pack, but it has introduced significant instability into our mission. The Omega, Eris, is an unknown variable. I must vet her. Darius didn't argue. Volkov's duty was loyalty and strategy. Rather, he offered a cool directive. Do it. But understand this, General, I am running a deep cover operation. Eris will not crack. If she is the strategist I believe her to be, she will maintain the illusion of an Omega who lucked into favor. Soon after, Volkov took Eris to a separate strategy tent, grilling her for 2 full hours. Darius listened remotely, pacing his tent, his knuckles white. He didn't know what scared him more. Volkov finding her to be genuinely worthless, or Volkov discovering the true strategic genius, revealing a security risk to the entire kingdom. By the time Eris returned, her shoulders were slumped and her face was pale. She had worn the Omega meekness like a thick cloak, deflecting every rigorous question with soft answers about pack gossip, scrubbing schedules, and who secretly traded supplies with the mountain shifters. Volkov's report was delivered curtly. She is exactly what she appears, Your Majesty. Low-ranking, fearful, slightly resilient. She offers no strategic insight, only minor, low-value information. A severe disappointment, and a continued liability to your prestige. Darius felt a surge of triumph, because Volkov's failure confirmed Eris's success. Next, Darius had to enforce the public lie. He dismissed Volkov with a cold glare. Your assessment is noted, General. But my decision stands, Darius asserted, his voice final. She is the royal mate. I will not have my own staff sabotaging a tactical decision. As the air thickened with unspoken tension, Volkov bowed stiffly and left. Darius walked over to Eris. He saw the flicker of relief in her eyes, quickly suppressed. You passed the test, Darius said. You successfully protected your secrets. Eris looked at the opulent room, confined now by the gilded cage of royal protocol. And you have confined me to this visibility, she replied softly, touching the heavy velvet curtains. My old rules no longer apply. Correct, Darius agreed. But the hunt begins now, and you will use this new visibility to give me the secrets you fought so hard to keep. Chapter 7. The First Data Drop. The sun had barely cleared the horizon. Darius was already in his planning tent, surrounded by the maps and the cold logic of war. The events of the night before felt like a calculated risk that had paid off, but the debt was now due. Come morning, he needed proof that claiming Eris hadn't been an act of madness. After Volkov's skeptical report, Darius had positioned a guard outside Eris's tent, a protection detail masked as a formality. He didn't order her to come. He simply waited for the Omega-turned mate to understand her new function. Moments later, Eris slipped into the tent. She wasn't wearing the borrowed royal finery yet, but a plain, serviceable Beta dress. Her movements were less hunched now, her posture rigid with a different kind of fear, the fear of a high-stakes failure. Darius didn't look up from the map. The truth, Eris. Not the gossip you fed the general. I need the hidden currents. With a single glance, Eris walked straight past his massive detailed maps to a small unremarkable ledger resting on a side table. Because she was a true operative, she knew where to find the things people didn't hide. Financial inconsistencies, Eris stated, her voice calm, professional. She pointed to a column. Your royal auditors missed this. The Sunless Watch Alpha reported an excess expenditure for pack security upgrades over the last 6 months. It's a clean paper trail, but the money didn't buy perimeter fencing. It bought discretionary gold ingots, untraceable currency. Darius finally looked up, impressed by the precision of the data. That information wasn't gossip. It was forensic accounting. Not only that, she immediately validated his core suspicion. The rogue was being paid and protected by this pack's leadership. In that moment, Darius's goal to verify her intel was instantly met. His emotional state shifted from cold skepticism to satisfied pragmatism. And where were these ingots transported? Eris leaned closer to the map, tracing a dirt path that bypassed the main roads. As the wind shifted, bringing her faint, almost sterile scent across the table, Darius had to physically control his wolf from reacting to her proximity. Undocumented entry points, she murmured. Access via the abandoned southern quarry, known only to the cleaning and delivery crews. She is the perfect strategist, Darius realized with a rush of victory, because her access was built from the bottom up, while his was built from the top down. That's why he instantly felt justified in the cost of claiming her. As a result, Darius ordered a subtle shift in his patrol routes, covering the quarry access points. The hunt was now focused entirely on the uncle's family circle and their financial dealings. Eris had confirmed her value, but Darius still had to deal with the nagging question. Can I trust the honesty of a lie? Chapter 8, Scrutiny in Disguise. The next test arrived that afternoon in the form of Lord Kalen, an elderly, shrewd delegate from a neighboring allied kingdom. Kalen's purpose was simple: assess the Alpha King's sanity following the bizarre Omega mate claim. Darius seated Eris next to him during the formal luncheon. Rather than introducing her, he simply allowed her presence to speak for itself. His immediate goal was to test her loyalty and performance under external pressure, seeing if the Omega facade would crumble under the scrutiny of a foreign power. Meanwhile, Eris was flawless. She ate sparingly and spoke only once, when directly asked about the local flora used in the decorative arrangements. Her answer was brief, knowledgeable, and utterly demure, the perfect performance of a quiet, low-ranking mate trying to please her powerful alpha. Still, Darius noticed the tiny, focused gleam in her eyes as she absorbed every word and posture Kalen offered. Before either could speak, Kalen leaned forward, his eyes twinkling with calculated curiosity. My king, your mate is quiet. A blessing in a world full of noise, perhaps. Darius felt a familiar surge of territorial protectiveness, not for a mate but for a valuable asset whose cover was being threatened. In fact, Kalen's interest was too keen, raising Darius's suspicions. She speaks when she has something relevant to say, Lord, Darius replied, his voice dangerously even. A quality many highborn mates lack. Without thinking, Eris subtly placed her hand beneath the table, gently touching the map drawn on the underside of Darius's campaign table, a secret map she'd been updating. It was a silent assertion. I am working. I am loyal to the mission. She felt it, clear as day, Darius thought, watching the subtle movement. Her dual nature was profoundly unsettling. How easily she transitioned from the master strategist discussing smuggling routes to the meek companion discussing orchids. He respected the skill but struggled with the inherent untrustworthiness. After the delegates left, Darius stopped Eris near his tent entrance. Your mother. Tell me about her. The question was designed to break the tactical barrier, to see if the vulnerability was real. Eris looked down, the mask faltering. She was in Beta class. She challenged the corruption here. She lost. As the truth unraveled, Darius saw a flicker of pure, unadulterated grief, a break in the stone that only appeared when her personal pain was touched. Chapter 9, The Failed Pinprick. Darius used the gold ingot information and Eris's map to set up a small, calculated trap. He knew the uncle sometimes retrieved cash from a hidden drop box near the north boundary at midnight. His goal was to confirm the antagonist's sophistication and proximity by catching him in the act. That night, Darius sat in his tent, watching the remote feed from his guard. Volkov had placed a team near the drop box. But then the screen showed nothing. The target never arrived. The hour passed, silent and empty. The operation was a complete failure. Darius slammed his fist silently on the table. He felt intense frustration and the creeping sensation of being watched. In the span of a breath, he realized, the uncle anticipated the move. Eris, who had been quietly charting financial movements nearby, looked up, her gray eyes reflecting the flickering kerosene lamp. "He knew," Darius muttered, the feeling of losing control bringing up the metallic taste of his past trauma. "He must have a mole in my perimeter guard because that location was known only to 3 of my most trusted men and now you." Eris didn't defend herself, she was too smart for that. Instead, she pointed to the uncle's latest movement chart. He diverted his funds this evening to a completely different location, a shrine in the Pax communal hall. He used a delivery boy, not himself. He used the risk to test your readiness. To make things worse, Eris's insight confirmed the horrifying truth. The antagonist wasn't just a rogue, he was a highly strategic thinker who could anticipate the Alpha King's movements. As the sky darkened outside, Darius realized the limits of his imperial tactics. His physical force and elite training were useless against someone who understood the granular logistics of the pack from the bottom up. Because of that, Darius knew he must rely more heavily on Eris's unique strategic insight to anticipate the antagonist. He turned to her, his decision made. "You need better data and I need results. Effective immediately, you will have access to my internal reports. Everything Volkov sees you see." Eris's eyes widened, a mixture of triumph and sheer terror. Darius saw the high-stakes risk settling over her. The tension broke as Darius made a commitment. He would give Eris the weapons of the king, further cementing his trust in a liar. This slight raise in stakes meant the hunt was now entirely dependent on the Omega spy, setting up the increased pressure and the major shift of Act 4. Chapter 10, The Blind Spot. The shift in protocol was immediate. Eris was no longer confined to the side table. She occupied a full section of Darius's campaign maps, surrounded by classified reports. As a result, the tension between her and General Volkov was thick and silent, a constant undercurrent that Darius had to ignore. His focus was on the objective. After reviewing the Royal Guard's detailed patrol logs, Eris found what Darius's highly trained, imperial mind had completely missed. "The South Gate sweep," Eris said, tracing a line on the map with a thin, sharp nail. Without a word, she pointed to a 4-minute gap in the timing every morning at 4 o'clock. "The guard assigned to that post, Beta Theron, knows the Omega detail washes the communal linen at 3:56. The heat and steam from the laundry chute completely mask the scent of anyone moving in the alley for precisely 4 minutes, until the wind shifts." Darius stared at the map. It was a critical blind spot, built not from a failure of training, but from the hubris of rank. His Beta guards had overlooked the Omega detail, deeming them invisible and irrelevant. Because of that, the antagonist had a secure, daily window to pass information. Only someone who has spent years on their knees in those damp halls would know the exact moment the wind carries the scent away, Eris finished, her voice challenging his elite strategy subtly but effectively. Darius felt humbled. He was the Alpha King, a military genius, yet he was reliant on the intimate, granular knowledge of a former cleaner. His goal was simple: adjust strategy and accept her superiority in local knowledge. Not only that, the realization brought a metallic taste of self-reproach. He'd almost been compromised by his own oversight. In that moment, Darius realized she was more than just an asset. She was a true strategist, one who fought with data and logistics, not brute strength. He quickly ordered a change in the Beta Theron's shift and placed an undetected royal spy in the laundry area. Before the words left her lips, Darius had affirmed Eris's value. He realizes he is a strategist, not just an information relay. He orders the change, then steps away, lost in thought about how close he was to being compromised, setting the stage for the coming confrontation. Chapter 11. The Poisoned Offering. 2 days later, the trap Eris set at the laundry chute yielded a courier, a terrified young Omega caught with a coded message, confirming the uncle was the rogue operative's financier. It was a massive success, the first tangible win in 3 years. Just like that, Eris proved her worth. However, the victory was immediately countered. That evening, a kitchen steward presented Eris with a small, beautifully packaged bottle of elderflower cordial, allegedly a gift from the pack's interim leader for her influence. Darius took the bottle. As if fate demanded it, a primal instinct, a flash of his infallible instincts, that rare alpha gift, screamed at him. Danger. Personal. Without warning, Darius smashed the bottle on the stone floor. The sweet liquid sizzled where it hit, turning the stone slightly green. It was a potent, slow-acting poison, designed to look like a sudden, natural illness. The steward instantly bolted, but was tackled by Volkov's guard seconds later. Eris gasped, the sound ragged and raw. Her voice trembled as the reality of the threat hit her. The uncle was not just hiding. He was striking, aiming for her life inside the king's own guarded sanctuary. Darius gripped her arm, pulling her close. Tell me the truth, Eris. Every last lie. His goal: protect the asset/mate and demand the complete truth about her capabilities. His state was cold fury, laced with terrifying calculation. Instead of the Omega meekness, Eris collapsed, the weight of years of pretense finally shattering. I am a Beta, she choked out, the admission a sound of profound pain and terror. My mother was a strategist. I trained with her in secret before they executed her. I maintained the Omega cover to finish her work, to find the proof. I am Beta-level strategist. I need to be seen as worthless. The midpoint shift occurred. Darius was forced to confront the full depth of her 3-year deception. As the silence roared around them, he realized the attempted murder confirmed her story and her vulnerability. The moment their eyes locked, their relationship shifted from a pragmatic alliance to a deeper, shared risk. Game changer. Darius now knew he was relying on a target, a Beta mind encased in an Omega's body, and the antagonist wanted her dead. Darius studies her face, realizing he must trust the truth behind the mask to survive, setting up the new direction. Chapter 12. The Tactical Reassignment. The discovery of the poison meant Darius could no longer treat Eris as merely an informant. She was a target, and a vital one. Because of that, his own need for complete control was forced to concede to the necessity of trust. Darius called Volkov into his tent, leaving Eris analyzing the recovered courier's coded message. Volkov entered, his expression grim, already knowing the severity of the poison attempt. Eris is a Beta-level strategist, Darius stated, allowing no room for debate. Her mother was falsely executed. She has been operating deep cover to find the evidence that will expose the rogue. The assassination attempt confirms her findings and her strategic worth. Volkov's jaw tightened. A dangerous claim, Your Majesty. This changes everything. It changes nothing but the speed of our operation, Darius countered, his tone decisive. His goal was to integrate Eris into the core operation and manage the heightened personal stakes by asserting his authority. His state was determined, focused, with a slight, almost undetectable tremor of personal vulnerability beneath the rigid control, because this trust felt like giving away a piece of his own armor. Effective immediately, Darius continued, maintaining eye contact with his general, Eris is officially reassigned under the guise of Royal Mate's intuition. She will have full access to our communications intercepts and operational planning. Darius took full ownership of the risk. More importantly, he presented Eris's new role as an unchallengeable assertion of his own power. Instead of seeing her as a dangerous liar, Darius now saw her as a powerful weapon against the corrosive lies of his enemy. With every step he took toward her corner of the tent, Darius felt a seismic shift. The hunt was no longer just about catching a rogue. It was now about protecting the woman whose brilliance he had reluctantly come to rely on. New direction established. Darius is now personally committed to Eris's protection and mission, doubling down on his trust in her. Darius watches Eris read the reports, seeing the strategic fire in her eyes, no longer afraid of the visibility, confirming he must move quickly to protect his valuable yet deeply vulnerable partner. Chapter 13, The Royal Performance. The air in the annexed hall shimmered with tension. Darius and Eris were attending a mandatory pack assembly, a formal ritual designed to project stability, but which Darius intended to use as sophisticated bait. After the failed assassination attempt, their alliance had shed all pretense of a temporary arrangement. It was now a joint military operation. Darius's goal: solidify the bait cover and assert dominance over the local threat, daring the uncle to strike publicly. His emotional state was calculating, yet he found a strange, grounding sense of security in their shared pretense, because for the first time in years, he wasn't carrying the burden of the rogue entirely alone. As if the world narrowed, Darius walked into the packed hall, his arm resting firmly around Eris's waist. This was not a soft embrace, it was an iron shield. He consciously played the part of the devoted Alpha King, using his presence as a physical barrier and a political statement. Meanwhile, Eris was performing a miracle. She wore the rich fabrics of a royal mate, but her eyes, usually assessing the perimeter, were fixed solely on Darius, projecting a forced, unwavering devotion. She spoke only in murmurs to him, giving him live, coded updates. The uncle is watching your left flank. Beta Ilara is too close to the main table. But then, Darius intercepted a nervous yet venomous look from the uncle directed at Eris. The uncle's eyes were narrowed, his lips thin. The antagonist was visibly struggling to reconcile the worthless Omega with the protected mate. Darius felt a flicker of savage triumph. The trap was sprung. At that moment, their public pretense was the weapon, and they had just fired the first shot. With every heartbeat, the line between the public facade and the private alliance began to blur for Darius. He was committed. There was no turning back now from the political cost of this mate. He intercepts a nervous look from the uncle directed at Eris, confirming the threat is engaged. Chapter 14, The Whispers of Treason. The attack was swift, silent, and entirely political, the kind of insidious war waged with whispers, not poison. Moments later, Darius's intelligence reports intercepted a rapidly spreading campaign orchestrated by the uncle. It wasn't about the rogue operative, it was about destroying Eris's reputation. The key narrative was two-pronged: twisted truths about Eris's dead mother, claiming she was a treasonous spy rather than a martyr, and veiled threats that Eris was using her Omega charm to manipulate the king for personal gain. Not only that, the uncle was using his financial network to plant these rumors with powerful beta lords outside the pack, effectively trying to turn the entire political landscape against her. Darius's goal: counter the political attack and defend his mate/assets reputation, consuming valuable resources. His state was intensely frustrated by the intangible, societal nature of the attack, because he could dispatch assassins with a word, but he couldn't kill a rumor. What followed was Darius having to expend significant political capital, publicly dismissing the unfounded gossip, and imposing harsh sanctions on anyone found spreading it. Despite that, the whispers persisted. The cost of protecting her was mounting, stretching his influence thin. Even so, the personal stakes rose even higher when Eris, reading the transcripts of the rumors, flinched at the mention of her mother's name. "They twist her memory," Eris whispered, her Beta Strategist facade momentarily cracking under the weight of her grief. Her chest ached with the injustice of it. Instead of tactical assurances, Darius found himself speaking from a place of genuine commitment. "I will neutralize the threat, Eris. This political filth ends now. Your mother's name will be cleared, because that is the debt I owe the truth you bring." In the quiet that followed, Darius reinforced his role as protector, knowing he was fighting not just a rogue, but a political chess match to protect her, a fight that locked him further into this dangerous, visible bond. Chapter 15, The Intercepted Move. Following Eris's latest highly precise intel, Darius launched a discreet raid targeting the rogue operative's communications center. a seemingly innocent abandoned water mill on the pack's outskirts. At the same time, Darius had positioned a distraction force near the financial hub, making the uncle believe the king was focused on money. Darius waited in his tent, Volkov standing rigidly by. As the silence stretched, the reports filtered in. The water mill was empty. Clean. Not a single trace of recent activity. The distraction team confirmed the uncle had been positioned to observe the financial hub, confirming his misdirection. The antagonist had completely anticipated Darius's move, and even the move behind the move. Darius gripped the edge of his table, his intense frustration boiling over. As the echo faded of his general's strained breathing, Darius felt a wave of the past trauma, the sickening feeling of being outmaneuvered, of losing control to an unseen enemy. This was exactly how he'd lost his advisor 3 years ago. "He is always one step ahead of the blade," Darius said, his voice low and dangerous. "He doesn't react to force, he anticipates our logic." Eris, who had been witnessing the failure, walked to the table. Her heart skipped as she recognized the despair in his eyes. "He doesn't fear the king's army, your majesty. He fears the truth. Because every time we apply your military logic, he moves his information. We must hit him where he cannot move the truth, his reputation, his deep-rooted place in the pack's history." Critical juncture. Darius realized the terrifying limit of his might. Only Eris's deep, intuitive strategy, which understood pack sentiment and not just pack logistics, could break the deadlock. He looks at Eris, the weight of his failed control pressing down on him, forcing him to accept that his methods alone were insufficient. The realization that his raw power was failing him set up the major collapse needed for Act 6, where the antagonist would leverage this frustration against them. Chapter 16, The Disloyalty Trap. The scent of defeat still lingered in the air of Darius's tent the morning after the failed raid. Darius was reviewing the meager intelligence when the tent flap opened, admitting the antagonist, the uncle looking smug and composed. In fact, the uncle had requested an audience, claiming urgent security concerns. Darius, still wrestling with the failure, allowed it. He didn't know what scared him more, the man's physical presence or the absolute certainty in his gait. The uncle laid out a set of highly convincing, framed documents. Communication logs showing Eris, using an old pack cipher, had been sending reports to a neutral territory Beta known to be connected to the actual rogue operative. The dates aligned perfectly with the financial diversion, 3.3, and the failed raid, 5.3. "Your Majesty," the uncle said, his voice slick with false deference. "The Omega mate, she is feeding you misinformation. She is a double agent working for the very rogue you seek. Because she knows the pack's logistics, she is positioned perfectly to sabotage your efforts and drain your resources." Darius felt the sharp stab of his past trauma, the metallic taste of betrayal rising in his throat. The evidence was damningly convincing even though he knew in his gut it was a setup. The antagonist had used Eris's core strength, her unique knowledge, and twisted it into the perfect weapon against Darius's core flaw, his profound difficulty with trust. Darius's goal: contain the damage and protect his kingdom's security. As the truth unraveled, he realized the immediate political reality. If the pack believed Eris was a traitor and Darius still backed her, it would shatter his authority and expose his inner circle to risk. He had to appear to believe the lie to protect his command. Major setback. Darius was forced to doubt Eris, not her loyalty but the wisdom of choosing to trust a liar in the first place. He dismissed the uncle with a chilling threat to investigate thoroughly, his mind already reeling with the agonizing choice ahead. He reviews the evidence, alone, feeling physically ill at the implications of what he must do next. Chapter 17, The Public Rebuke. Darius called a sudden non-negotiable meeting of all his royal guard and the Sunless Watch betas. Eris was required to attend, standing silently near the back, looking small and defenseless in the crowd. But then Darius stood before them, a towering figure of rigid command. He spoke of the recent tactical failures and the internal compromise. His voice was cold, clipped, every word a deliberate weapon aimed at Eris. "The operative who was compromised will be isolated," Darius stated, his gaze meeting Eris's for a split second before snapping away. He avoided her eyes because looking at her would break his resolve. Her access to royal resources is revoked. She will remain confined to the secondary barracks until this matter is resolved. Key event: loss of an ally/resource. Darius publicly pulled back his support, treating Eris with the cold formality of an asset being put on ice. He watched her face go blank, the Omega mask, the mask of utter, emotionless submission, slamming back into place. He knew he had hurt her deeply, choosing control and protocol over his burgeoning personal connection. Eris walked out without a word, her departure a silent indictment of his cowardice. Darius's goal: preserve the integrity of the mission and his image of perfect control. His state was agonizing. He felt defeated by the necessity of his choice, because his fear of losing the whole operation outweighed the protection of one person, even the one person who held the key. Lowest point approaching. Darius's core emotional flaw, his need for rigid, solitary control, was winning. He had sacrificed Eris's vulnerability and honesty to maintain his facade of power, sealing her isolation. He avoids her gaze as he leaves the room, sealing her isolation, ensuring the antagonist believes his victory is complete. Chapter 18: The Solitary Contemplation. The large strategy tent felt suddenly cavernous and cold, stripped bare of Eris's presence and her maps. Darius sat alone at his campaign table, the quiet desk lamps casting long, lonely shadows. He held the framed evidence in his hand, knowing it was meticulously crafted falsehood, yet understanding its brutal political effectiveness. In the stillness that followed, Darius experienced the all-is-lost moment. He had driven away his greatest asset. He had alienated the one person who offered a genuine partnership built on shared risk, all to maintain an illusion of competence that had just failed spectacularly. Her thoughts spun in his memory, her strategic insight, her courage. Without warning, he confronted the fact that his need for rigid, solitary control had led to the exact failure he was trying to prevent. The mission seems impossible without her specific genius. The rogue operative was laughing, maneuvering Darius like a puppet on strings. Darius saw the pattern clearly. His solitary control led to blind spots. His fear of vulnerability made him predictable. Deep down he knew the truth. He failed to trust her completely when it mattered most, and the cost was his entire operation. Darius's goal: contend with the emotional and strategic failure. His state was utter despair, resignation to a solitary, likely losing fight. Crucible moment. He faced the true cost of his emotional isolation. He failed to break Eris out of her mask, instead he reinforced it. He might die without ever capturing the rogue, and Eris might die isolated, her mother's name still tainted. As the air thickened with his despair, Darius finally saw the dark irony. He had tried to control the most uncontrollable element, Eris, and in doing so, lost control of everything else. He pushed himself away from the table, defeated. He prepares to withdraw his forces, defeated, setting the stage for the crucial spark. Chapter 19: The Whisper in the Walls. Darius was still seated alone in the cold, desolate strategy tent. He hadn't slept, hadn't shifted, just staring at the empty spaces where Eris's energy and insight used to be. As though fate whispered, he unconsciously ran his hand along the campaign table, the underside where Eris used to map out her findings. With his scent in the air mixing with the damp scent of failure, he stood and began to pace. He walked aimlessly toward the back of the tent, near the service entry that had once belonged to the main hall. Maybe it was fate, or perhaps the deep, ingrained habit of an Omega, but Eris always knew where the flaws in the material existed. He stopped by the tent seam where the lining met the ground, a spot only the cleaning detail would touch. Without warning, his eyes fell on a crease in the heavy linen near a faint, old stain on the floor. He pressed the stain with his thumb. It was wax. As fire bloomed beneath her skin, he remembered Eris lighting a small, cheap candle here one night, claiming the main lanterns were too harsh for reading. He carefully peeled back the heavy linen, revealing a tiny hidden pocket. Inside was a piece of parchment, wrapped tightly, sealed with a single drop of the cheap wax. Darius's hands trembled as he opened it. It was not a message of love nor fear. It was a final, brilliant piece of intel. Eris had predicted his isolation and the immediate security changes. The message provided the breakthrough evidence: a date, a time, and a location for a confrontation that involved a sacred relic the uncle would never abandon. Key event: the turning point from despair. Darius chose to trust this silent, coded message hidden in the spot only the former Omega would touch, the heart of her low-rank world, over his own years of rigid protocols and crushing fears. His goal: follow Eris's new lead, commit to her strategy entirely. His state: renewed hope and an intense, focused determination born of earned trust. The climb back begins. Darius discarded his self-imposed isolation and finally trusted the unseen logic of the Omega spy. He gathers his inner circle, his face grim, and lays out the high-risk plan, preparing them for the shock of Eris's return. Chapter 20: The Strategic Surrender. Darius called a quick, urgent meeting with Volkov and his captains. The air was tense. They believed the mission was in its final stages of withdrawal. After securing the tent and establishing a tight perimeter, Darius dropped the bombshell. The evidence against Eris was fabricated, Darius announced, his voice devoid of the earlier defeat, replaced by cold certainty. The antagonist used her knowledge to fool us, and I used my own weakness, my need for control, to publicly fail her. Volkov looked stunned. Her world tilted with the shock of hearing the Alpha King admit to a flaw and a tactical error. Darius laid out Eris's final plan: a public confrontation at the Pack's most vulnerable, yet most sacred location, the ancestral communal hall, to draw the uncle out. They would use Darius's public authority and Eris's undeniable intelligence as bait. Darius's goal: execute Eris's plan precisely and accept her strategic command publicly within his circle. His state: focused, driven, and profoundly respectful of the mind behind the plan. The plan is hers, Darius stated, looking Volkov directly in the eye. She anticipates his defensive position. I will follow her tactical lead. Our goal is not merely capture, but exposure and justice for her mother. Preparing for the end, Darius accepted the final step of his transformation, giving up the tactical reins to Eris. He was no longer the solitary force. As the bond pulsed between the king, the general, and the ghost of the Omega, they prepared for the final clash. Not only that, this decision showed his men that true strength wasn't about control, but about knowing when and whom to trust. He prepares his appearance, shifting from the detached king to the focused warrior, ready to rely on the strategy of the woman he wronged. Chapter 21: The Approach. It was high noon. The time Eris had specified. Darius moved his forces, a small, highly disciplined contingent, into position on the edges of the weak Pack's communal hall. The air was sharp with the scent of pine and anticipation. With every step he took, Darius felt the weight of his reliance. He was relying on the weakest-looking wolf he had ever met, a beta encased in an Omega's identity, to guide him to victory against the most intelligent rogue he had ever faced. He scanned the hall, his golden eyes sweeping the roofs and windows. He felt fear, but it was fear for her safety, not fear of losing control. This shift, from self-preservation to protective instinct, was the true measure of his arc. Because he had trusted her, the mission had purpose beyond mere capture. Volkov, Darius murmured, his voice tight. Eris will be vulnerable. Your only directive is her protection. Yes, Your Majesty, Volkov confirmed, his voice now imbued with a deep, earned respect for the Omega strategist. As if the forest watched, Darius stood at the edge of the clearing, knowing the uncle was nearby, watching for any sign of kingly retreat. His instincts surged, telling him the confrontation was minutes away. The space between them burned, the space between Darius's old, solitary life and the dangerous, necessary partnership with Eris. Darius signals his captain, the moment of confrontation having arrived. The battle for the truth and for Eris's life is about to begin. Chapter 22: The Climax. The great communal hall was silent, unnaturally still in the noonday sun. Darius stood in the center, flanked by only Volkov and 2 royal guards, a calculated display of strength mixed with vulnerability. The bait was set. A beat later, the uncle emerged from the shadows of the ancestral shrine. He was no longer smug. His face was a mask of cold fury, because he knew this was his last stand. "You came here alone, your majesty," the uncle sneered, his voice echoing. "To face the evidence of your mate's treason?" Darius initiated the confrontation. "I came to face you, rogue. And I brought the only evidence that matters." As if summoned, Eris stepped out from behind the shrine. She wasn't wearing the Omega dress, nor the meek facade. She wore a simple dark Beta issue tunic, her hair pulled back, exposing the cold, focused intensity in her gray eyes. Her body moved on instinct, exuding the raw, quiet authority of a true strategist. Without another word, Eris presented the final evidence. A ciphered message proving the uncle's corruption and his role in her mother's execution, hidden within the shrine's structural blueprints only she knew existed. The crowd of Sunless Watch members, drawn by the clamor, gasped. The uncle snarled, dropping all pretense. "Worthless dirt. You'll die here." As fire bloomed beneath her skin, the uncle lunged not at Darius but directly at Eris, knowing she was the critical vulnerability. Darius reacted instantly. His body moved on instinct, shifting into his full alpha warrior form, a blur of cedar-scented fur and fury. He intercepted the uncle mid-lunge, his strength fueled by an intensity he hadn't felt in years, an intensity born of defending the person he trusts, not just the mission. The fight was brutal and short. Darius fought with calculated, devastating force, ensuring the antagonist couldn't escape or strike Eris. He used his bulk and training to pin the uncle against the stone shrine, the impact shaking the old building. Climax resolved. Darius fought to neutralize the threat and secure justice. His state was peak intensity, followed by a powerful relief as the antagonist was finally subdued. The transformation was complete. Darius chose trust, and that choice led to victory. Darius looks at Eris, bloody but unbowed in the silence of the aftermath, knowing the physical fight is over, but the true connection is about to begin. Chapter 23, Falling Action. The silence that fell after Darius subdued the uncle was broken only by the rasp of the king's breath. Darius didn't look at the defeated Beta. He looked straight at Eris. With a single glance, he saw her face, scratched, pale, but her eyes held a fierce, triumphant clarity. She was unbowed. Darius's goal: publicly confirm Eris's instrumental role and assert his authority. As the bond pulsed with shared adrenaline and mutual respect, he addressed the assembled pack. "The uncle is guilty of treason, corruption, and the murder of a loyal Beta," Darius announced, his voice ringing with absolute, unchallengeable authority. The evidence was gathered and presented by the royal mate, Eris. Her mother's name is cleared. Any wolf who denies her place or spreads the antagonist's lies will face the full weight of the royal charter. Confronting the core emotional question. Darius had been afraid to trust her lies, but he won because he ultimately trusted her truth. He made her visible not as an asset but as his partner. He then addressed Eris, the formality gone, replaced by a profound sincerity. "I failed you, Eris. My need for control made me blind to your strategy. I risked your life to protect my image." Her voice trembled slightly as she responded, because she saw the raw honesty beneath the king's armor. "You chose the greater good, your majesty. You chose the truth. That is enough." The tension broke as Darius stepped toward her. He didn't rush. He gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing a speck of dirt. "It is not enough. You are not an asset, Eris. You are the cipher that unlocked my purpose." He escorts Eris away from the scene, choosing privacy for their true resolution, knowing the end of the mission is the beginning of their relationship. Chapter 24 Resolution. Darius and Eris stood alone back in the king's tent, the map-covered table the silent witness to their journey. The silence now was comfortable, earned. Eris had achieved justice for her mother and secured her own safety, but the cost was her anonymity. Darius had achieved victory but sacrificed his rigid, solitary control. With every heartbeat, the pragmatic alliance was yielding to something deeper. "What now, Your Majesty?" Eris asked, her voice softer, tinged with uncertainty. "My life's mission is complete. My role as your bait is over." Darius walked to her. He was no longer the cold, distant king. He was a man deeply affected by a shared crisis. "The lie is complete, Eris, but the truth remains. You are the only wolf whose mind moves faster than mine. I need you as my chief strategist. I need you as my equal." As fire bloomed beneath her skin, he reached out, not to command but to plead. "More than that, Eris. I failed to trust you completely, and it nearly cost me everything. I cannot let you go. The fear I felt for you was greater than any fear of losing my throne." He pulled her against him, burying his face in her hair. As the wind shifted, she smelled only cedar, safety, and a raw, powerful desire. She wrapped her arms around his waist. Her chest ached with the release of 3 years of pressure. "I only trusted you, Darius, because you were the only one who didn't overlook me." And just like that, everything changed. The public pretense dissolved, giving way to the passionate, earned intimacy of two equals. Their romance was not built on instant attraction, but on strategic respect, shared danger, and the mutual understanding of pain. The cold alpha had finally found a vulnerability he couldn't control, and he cherished it. Their kiss was a surrender of control for him, and a reclamation of self for her. The story ends on a powerful note of mutual commitment. Darius had finally answered his core emotional question. Yes, he could trust the woman who lived a lie, because her lies were in service of a greater truth.